Hi, Mystery Recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain a sci-fi thriller movie called The Abandon. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie begins with a battlefield scene in Iraq, with massive explosions and gunfire taking place. Several American soldiers take cover inside a dilapidated building while firing valiantly at the enemy. During the chaos, the team captain and a soldier named Miles Willis drag wounded comrades to safety. Unfortunately, the captain gets shot and passes away soon after. Miles realizes they can't hold back the enemy and retreats, but he's also shot in the abdomen. He then crawls to safety and waits for his death. But just then, Miles notices an approaching airstrike in the distance. A bright light surrounds him, and he feels immense pain before passing out. In the next scene, Miles regains consciousness and finds himself in a large concrete cube. He tries to stand up, but the pain is still overwhelming, and he can barely move. Miles screams for help and asks if he can get medical attention, but no one answers. With no other option, he patches up his wound with the little knowledge he was taught in training. After that, he tries to call for help using the radio, but it doesn't seem to work. Just then, Miles notices the word abandon written upside down on the wall, which was not there moments before. He assumes the enemy has kidnapped him and begins screaming Assalamu alaikum to get their attention. When no one responds, a frustrated Miles looks down and sees the phrase "Save thy sinner" etched into the ground. He then looks up at the wall again and notices that new words have been added, which now says abandon all hope. At this point, the temperature in the room suddenly rises, prompting Miles to remove his clothes. His sweat starts to drip onto the ground and sizzle, which terrifies him. A panicked Miles grabs his gun and shoots at the wall, but nothing happens. In the end, he ends up losing consciousness due to the unbearable heat. Miles wakes up sometime later and realizes that the room has returned to normal temperature. He then regains his composure and opens his bottle to drink some water. Suddenly, the entire room starts spinning, tossing Miles around like a ball. His belongings are scattered everywhere, and he is bruised from hitting the hard walls. When the spinning finally stops, he notices that the room has shifted position, with the words in different spots than before. Afterward, Miles looks up and sees his gun and satellite phone stuck to the roof of the cube, far out of reach. He tries to use the radio again and soon hears a woman's voice on the other end. This fills him with some hope, but her voice soon fades away. Miles attempts to broadcast his satellite number over the radio, hoping that someone will call him. At first, he has a hard time recalling his phone number due to all this trauma, but then he notices the number on his phone sticker, so he reads it with the help of his binoculars and writes it on the floor. Shortly after, Miles hears his phone ringing, which is still stuck to the ceiling. He tries to jump to retrieve it, but he fails and experiences immense pain from his wound. He then attempts to knock the phone down with his boot, but it also becomes stuck to the ceiling. Just then, the temperature in the room drops dramatically, causing Miles's beard to freeze almost instantly. The temperature quickly returns to normal, but the room spins again, violently tossing Miles around. The only good thing that comes out of this is that he finally manages to reach his satellite phone. Following this, Miles makes his way to his helmet and pulls out a picture of his daughter and wife. He then finds a piece of chewing gum and eats it to curb his hunger. Afterward, he searches for the number that called him earlier and dials it. Miles soon hears a distressed woman speaking on the other end. She introduces herself as Damsey and turns out that she's also trapped in a similar cube. When asked how she called him, Damsey explains that his phone number was written on her wall. She sounds terrified, so he calms down and promises they will find a way to escape. Next, Miles asks Damsey what she remembers as the last thing before arriving in the cube, but she is hesitant to answer, fearing he might be part of the organization responsible for her kidnapping. She begins yelling at him, so Miles angrily retorts that he is also trapped here and bleeding. Damsey then apologizes and explains that she was on the highway before arriving here. Miles mentions that his location was also close to a highway. Damsey inquires if he was stationed there, which shocks Miles because he hasn't revealed his military background to her. He becomes suspicious, but Damsey explains that she just guessed based on his manner of speaking. As the two continue talking, Miles is suddenly restrained by an unseen force and his limbs are spread out. He begins to scream in pain, but soon after he is finally released. Before he can breathe a sigh of relief though, the cube begins to move again. This time it begins shrinking instead of spinning. Miles presses against the walls to keep them from contracting, but he eventually succumbs to the unbearable pressure and passes out. A while later, he awakens to Damsey screaming through her phone. Miles panics about what just happened, but she calms him down down, revealing that she experienced the same ordeal. It turns out her shoulder is dislocated, and she proceeds to reposition it while cursing in pain. The two continue to discuss their situations, and Damsey reveals that she doesn't recall being kidnapped by anyone on the Massachusetts highway. Hearing this, Miles is shocked as he's in Iraq, and his phone only operates on a short-range military network. Given the vast distance between Iraq and Massachusetts, it seems impossible that they are communicating. He suggests that she could be in Iraq, but Damsey explains that it would take days for her to travel there, and she has only been here for an hour. She also describes seeing a flash of light in the sky before losing consciousness. Just then, Miles receives another call, and he hears a man frantically speaking in Portuguese. Miles doesn't understand it, so the man talks in broken English, stating that the equation has no solution and they must die. He continues to ramble that they cannot win and urges him to surrender for sacrifice. Hearing this, Miles is disturbed and hangs up the phone before resuming his conversation with Damsey. She asks him where he went briefly, but he lies, saying that he lost the signal. Miles doesn't mention the Portuguese caller, but does ask her to look for any equations on the wall. Meanwhile, his wound is still bleeding, so he starts changing his bandage while groaning in pain. Damsey then expresses her confusion as to why they would choose her when she is just an ordinary algebra teacher. She admits that she is engaged to a man who is also in the military, but she doesn't seem happy about it. Hearing this, Miles also opens up about his marriage, admitting that he and his wife are not on good terms. Soon after, he examines the walls and discovers a word equation with the number 2007 next to it. He thinks it's a joke and begins to laugh, saying that they have no idea what will happen in the future. Damsey asks him what year he believes it is, and Miles reveals that he is in 1991. She then inquires whether he is familiar with terms such as Instagram, selfie, skibbity-riz, and Twitter, but he doesn't have a clue about them. At this moment, the room begins to move, emitting extremely loud screeching noises. Miles passes out instantly, and when he wakes up, he notices the room has shrunk again, and his phone is ringing. When he notices the word answer written on the wall, he immediately picks the call. Damsey then requests that he take something sharp and draw something on the wall. Miles draws an X, and she tells him that she can see the drawing appear. She also draws a hand on her wall, which Miles notices immediately. They then realize that whatever they write on their side of the wall is visible to the other. Good thing that our heroes are geniuses. This explains how Damsey and the Portuguese man got Miles's phone number. Damsey finally reveals to him that she is in the year 2020, which shocks the soldier. If it's only 2020, how do you know, Skibbity Riz? She claims that since their kidnapper can summon people from the past and future, there's no doubt that these people can manipulate time. She then discusses the fourth dimension and shares that she is a math prodigy with an advanced degree, but her fiancé was upset that she was smarter than him, so he got her a teaching job. Although confused, Miles admits that he has always been good at math. He then inquires about the world in 2020 and whether flying cars exist, but Damsey responds that it is all a fantasy now. Miles asks her if the war with Iraq has ended, but she responds that thousands of soldiers are still dying in the conflict. Hearing this, Miles laments that there have always been soldiers in his family, and he believes they died for nothing. He reveals that his own father fought in the Vietnam War before passing away. Shortly after, they notice some Arabic inscriptions appear on the wall. Miles then takes out an Arabic dictionary from his bag and begins translating the text. It turns out to be a well-known mathematical equation concerning the fourth dimension, a subject Damsey has extensively studied. The two decide to work together to solve the equation, hoping that it will be the key to their escape. Miles then speculates that whoever solves it first will be the one to break free, but Damsey disagrees. She explains that if that were the case, they would be unable to see what the other person is writing on the wall. As soon as he finishes writing the entire equation on the ground, someone begins crossing it out. Miles frantically tries to write it on his arm, but is unable to keep up, which frustrates both of them. They then resume talking about their lives, and Damsey asks Miles if he has ever hurt his family, pointing out how war turns people into monsters. Miles is uncomfortable with the question, but admits that his father used to beat his mother. He claims that he wanted to stop it, but was too young to protect her. Afterward, Damsey focuses for a while and finally recalls the equation, since she has seen it before as well. She starts writing it down, but the cube soon starts moving again. This time, the walls shrink significantly faster than before, and the ground transforms into a powerful magnet. Miles is hit several times, and the bullet is pulled from his abdomen, causing him to pass out yet again. A while later, he awakens with a severe headache and discovers that his ears are bleeding. He realizes that there are only 2 squares remaining in the cube, which means he will soon be crushed by the walls. Miles. Moments later, Miles receives a call and thinks it's Damsey, but it turns out to be the Portuguese man from earlier. He asks him to sacrifice again, but Miles becomes frustrated and hangs up. He then gets a call from Damsey, who informs him that her arm is broken. She also begins rambling about how they must die, and Miles realizes she has spoken with the other guy. He begs her to solve the equation, but Damsey reveals that according to the Portuguese man, they are being held by an alien race to test their intelligence. She fears that solving the equation might lead these beings to see humanity as a threat, but Miles persuades her not to listen to the crazy man and to solve the equation anyway. At this moment, the phone abruptly cuts off and the lights go out, plunging the cube into complete darkness. Miles then sees harrowing memories from his past and hears his mother's screams and gunshots. He is overcome with panic and his mind begins to play tricks on him. He then points a gun at his head while screaming and blaming his father for making his life a living hell. Miles is about to pull the trigger, but he changes his mind at the last moment and calls Damsey instead. She is also distraught and admits that she has been having visions of her fiancé. She admits that she has bruises all over her face, not from the cube, but from her fiancé's constant beatings. Damsey explains that she planned to flee from him, which is why she was driving on the highway and got into an accident. She asks Miles if he has ever hurt his wife, and he admits that he hasn't, but he wanted to. This enrages Damsey, and she curses at him before abruptly hanging up the call. Shortly after, Miles receives another call from the Portuguese man, who confesses that he was the one who erased the equation from the floor. He insists that they should not solve the equation and should sacrifice themselves for the survival of humanity. The man explains that it is not the first time this has happened. It turns out that every few years, they abduct people to test their intelligence and see if humanity is a threat. Before Miles can ask how the man knows so much, the call is cut off and the cube begins to move again. It ends up reducing the room to a tiny space, barely large enough to breathe. In this tense moment, Damsey calls Miles and asks again if he has hit his wife. He assures her that he hasn't, as he doesn't want to end up like his father. Miles apologizes for what her fiancé did to her and reveals that his own father beat him throughout his childhood. He says that he doesn't deserve to live and insists that she must be the one to make it out of this place alive. Miles then tearfully asks her to find his wife and daughter and tell them how much he loves them. Soon after, the cube starts moving again, but Damsey manages to complete the equation, and the answer turns out to be the number 1. She shouts the solution out loud and tries to spin the room once according to the equation, but it doesn't work. It does though, according to teriology. Damsey then realizes that the number 1 represents unity, and the aliens want to test if humans can work together despite their differences. As the walls close in, Miles and Damsey use all of their strength to hold them off until they finally vanish. Moments later, the two find themselves in a gravity-free space filled with glass structures alongside several other trapped people. Miles and Damsey are relieved to meet for the first time and exchange smiles. However, before they get a chance to talk, an unseen force begins to slowly pull them apart. In the final scene, Miles awakens on the same hill where he was injured before losing consciousness. After a few minutes of walking, he encounters several other US soldiers and moves towards them. Strange planes are flying overhead, and everyone is staring up at the sky. Miles then approaches the group and looks up at something terrifying in the sky. However, before the audience can see what it is, the movie comes to an end. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.